Hello, everybody. My name is Dario Minaya. I am with Minaya Learning Global Solutions. I will be producing this event. We are here for our first webinar from Reactive to Transformative, Mastering the Art of Learning Strategy, presented by our Senior Learning Strategist and Consultant and Executive Coach at Minaya Learning Global Solutions, Susan Minaya, who is an industry award-winning learning professional with a special focus on leadership development, strategic planning, and executive coaching for learning organizations. Susan has a background working in global, national, and regional organizations and maintains credentials in training and HR and her ACC coaching credentials from International Coaching Federation, which brings a powerful set of insights and experiences to client projects. Susan is passionate about learning strategy development and has seen the transformational impact learning strategies have to help learning leaders more effectively manage the learning function and become real strategic partners within the organization. Her mission is to help learning professionals understand, apply, and execute learning strategy for more impactful business outcomes. As the COO and Chief Learning Strategist for her company, Minaya Learning Global Solutions, that she owns with her partner in life and business, she applies their learning strategy consulting practice with Fortune 500 companies in a broad array of industries, including healthcare, retail, food manufacturing, quick service food manufacturing, financial services, telecommunications, and insurance. She lends her expertise in instructional design and learning management as an advisory board member of the Florida Gulf Coast University Masters in Instructional Design and EdTech IDET program. I could keep going. I could say much more, but rather than me talking, let's hear from the person herself, Susan Minaya. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dario. Thanks for that kind introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for our conversation from reactive to transformative, mastering the art of learning strategy. So I love the training and development space. And even after 30 years, I still get so energized by this work. And learning strategy and knowing when and how to leverage it really is a game changer for learning leaders. And I learned this firsthand. And the secret is that you don't have to go to school and you don't have to get certified to do it. You really can do this work on your own. And so when I work with clients, I really like to encourage them to tag along with me through the process if they're able, because to be able to learn the essentials of how to create a learning strategy there's a framework in which to do it. And it's a framework that I've actually found very successful in working with my clients and also have shared with my clients so that they too can do this work. I think today really what I want to share with you is for you to get a sense of how to tackle this work on your own, appreciate the value of a learning strategy from a practical framework perspective. So I hope you find value in the session today. So let's begin. So if you look at this picture, I want to know what you see, and you can put your answer in the chat, So what do you see on the left side of this target? What's coming up for us, Dario?
A mess, craziness, chaos,
right?
Confusion.
And what do you notice on the right-hand side?
Order, alignment, alignments. Alignment is the go-to.
Yeah, and cohesion, I see.
Mm.
And it's so true because, a learning strategy, when you think about it, is like that target that's in the middle. It's what gets everyone moving in the same direction. And it happens, what happens, I'm sorry, do you think when organizations don't have a learning strategy, it's really going to look like that picture on the left-hand side. And so when we talk about this from reactive to transformative, that reactive looks like the left side, where we're fielding requests, we're doing a lot of work, we're all learning professionals, we know what that feels like, and it's not a comfortable place to be. What it feels like on the right-hand side is that we're very purposeful, intentional about the work that we're doing, and we're clear about it. And, there's not that chaos that's going on around us. So oftentimes what people ask me is, what's the difference between a learning strategy and a strategic plan for an organization? And it's really that the learning strategy is focused on how you optimize the learning and development function within the organization. to support organizational goals. So you can kind of look at it, I guess, as a sub-strategy underneath a broader organizational strategy. But it's critical because depending on the type of strategy you're doing, it really is there to support the organizational goals so that the learning organization is doing the right work that they need to be doing and not like all the spaghetti bowl stuff that's happening on the left-hand side. So training should be very purposeful because it's costly, it takes time and it takes resources. And so we want to make sure that whatever we're doing in the world of training and development for organizations is definitely the right work. So simplistically speaking, when you're doing learning strategy, I mean, let's just break it down. We're talking about what's the current state and the gaps and the impacts that we have, what's going on out there in the organization. And when we really have to take time to look at that. And then we also then, based on what we're doing there, and we're going to talk a lot about these stages, is really looking at the future state. So what would that look like, So here's what we're dealing with today. Here's the impact negatively it's having on the organization. And then because of the research that we do, we ideate the best solutions because we're learning professionals, and we'll talk about how we do that so that we can create that future state. And then it's also creating that implementation plan. So we understand, okay, it's sort of like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? It's like that. How do we phase the work so that it feels manageable and something that we're able to actually do? And then finally, what costs are associated? So I'm curious, has anyone here ever created a learning strategy for your organization, or if you're a consultant, clients that you work with?
Feel free to put those answers in the chat.
Well, maybe not, but learning strategy is, depending on the type of strategy that you're doing, can really be tried in an earlier role, Casey says, but no interest. No interest in doing it, Casey, or but so I think as we go through today, we're really going to take a look at it because I like to think of learning strategy as kind of a team sport, right? So it's better done with other people on your organization, and we're going to talk about that. But as learning professionals, what's important for learning strategy? So for me, being an ATT certified professional in talent development, I ascribe to the ATD capability model. And I think it's a really sound model for learning professionals because of the three dimensions that they have there, from professional to personal and organizational, and the competencies required for that. So most of you here today, if you're learning professionals, you're probably very familiar with this model because you're either an ATD member or maybe a credentialed talent development specialist. And if you aren't familiar with it, you can easily access it at td.org capability model. I highly encourage it. So as we look across the model, it's safe to say really that learning strategy requires all of these capabilities in some form or fashion. But what I'd like to share with you today is really helping you understand what are the most important, the top three for each of these categories, because they're all important for learning professionals, but I think to do learning strategy well, there's specifics in each of these areas. So let's first start at building personal capability. So for building personal capability, the first one is going to be communication. Why? Because when you're doing the work that you're doing, you're interacting with stakeholders across the organization, communication is really the foundation of every phase of the learning strategy development. Whether you're doing it surveys, focus groups, you're articulating findings in a strategy to executives, the ability for a learning professional to convey ideas with precision and impact really determines how well your strategy is understood, supported, and ultimately implemented. So effective communication is going to ensure that there's alignment with your strategy. It's going to help minimize misunderstandings, and it's also going to help build credibility for you, enabling you to get the resources and the commitment that you need to move from plan to execution. The second one is collaboration and leadership. So developing a successful learning strategy, as I said, is a team sport, right? It requires working across functions in the organization, executives, C-suite individuals, it could be employees that are doing the job. So at every level of the organization, especially if you're doing a broader learning organizational strategy, you need these perspectives to really understand what's going on within the organization. What is the current state? What are those gaps that we're trying to close? So that you can find the right solutions that'll resonate with your business stakeholders. So on the collaboration side, it really means you're building trust and you're fostering shared ownership of that strategy. When we talk about the leadership side of this competency, it means our ability to influence others, often without formal authority, right, within the organization, to embrace really what would be a unified vision for the learning strategy. So this is so powerful. These two things combine, collaboration and leadership. And then when you put them together, you're able to start, you're starting to create champions for your strategy. Who are those individuals are going to be people that are also going to advocate for you publicly for the strategy that you're trying to implement across the organization. And then finally, under the personal capability is project management. And I say that because there's a lot of moving parts when you're working on a learning strategy. So it's data analysis or stakeholder engagement. You have technology reviews, pilot programs that you may be doing, executive presentations. So strong project management capabilities are able to help you stay on track with all the things that you have going on, because there's a lot of piece parts to a strategy. And then also ensuring that your deadlines are met and resources are used, wisely to be able to get the work done. So when you apply disciplined planning, scheduling, and tracking, you're going to reduce risk, you're going to maintain that stakeholder confidence, and you're going to create a very structured environment in which your strategy can progress from concept to delivery without really losing your focus. So the next part of the capability model is looking at professional capability. So here is one of my top 3 here are learning sciences is number 1, right? So effective learning strategy development really requires that we have a deep understanding of how people learn, retain information, and apply knowledge. So the learning sciences encompass the cognitive, the emotional, and the environmental factors that influence learning. As well as the evidence-based methods. So if we think about it, by grounding your strategy in these principles that learning professionals should have as a baseline, we ensure that our recommendations are not only engaging, but they're also effective in achieving our performance outcomes. So this means considering factors like cognitive load, too much, how we're presenting the information, how we're motivating learners, maybe memory retention, maybe practice opportunities, transfer of learning to the workplace. All of these things we have to think about when we're thinking about our solution set that we're offering. So a strategy, especially a learning strategy, rooting in learning science, ensures that every initiative has a strong pedagogy, right, foundation, and it's designed to drive measurable and sustainable results. So that's why that's important. That's what we do. That's our work. That's our profession. We should know that. Technology application. Okay, so we know where we're at today with AI and all of the changes and rapid advancement of technology. So learning strategies today really have to account for that evolving role of technology. So what we're offering today really has to be able to have some sense of sustainability for a couple of few years going forward, right? And it's also hard for learning professionals to keep up with all that technology. I think many of us can really feel that as we talk about AI capabilities and learning and development today, how we're able to integrate them, but it's really important that we understand, the tools and platforms that support learning, from learning management systems to our AI components that we may be having, how we're going to evaluate things, and then really understanding what's a good strategic fit for the organization from a scalability standpoint, how we might integrate with other ecosystems within the broader organization. So we have to really have an understanding of the impact of technology and also the constraints, right? Because we don't want to be making recommendations without understanding the potential resistance that could come with those recommendations around technology, how they might align with operational realities, and really being able to leverage technology as an accelerator of the strategy rather than a barrier. And we know that anything with technology often takes time. So the last one here that I wanted to share with you in this category is evaluating impact. So really no learning strategy is complete without that clear line of sight, right? So whenever we're doing our learning strategy, we always have to begin with the end in mind, right? So what are the measurable outcomes and things that we're going to be focusing on with this strategy to be able to achieve? And that's even in every learning intervention that we do. It has to do with our strategy recommendations, what we're expecting to the outcomes to be of those as it relates to organizational capability and impact for results, be it business results, be it just capability of our workforce talent. So I think enabling L&D leaders to make data-informed choices really demonstrate the strategic value of the function of the learning organization. And too often, in looking at different types of strategy recommendations, I see that metrics aren't often incorporated, which is kind of a shame because it's really a missed opportunity for the learning organization to be able to share the good work that they do. All right, the next and final one I want to share with you, because I say these are important because to me they're definitely, oh, I kind of jumped the gun, didn't I? I'm talking about that capability. We talked about evaluating impact, excuse me. But then the last one is organizational capability. So consulting and business partnering. So the learning professional really needs to have strong business partnerships. So consulting and business partnering really requires that you engage with your stakeholders, not just as recipients of L&D services, but as co-creators of strategy, of understanding how do we solve for these performance problems that we're having within the organization. So when we ask the right questions, we start uncovering root causes and framing solutions in our business terms, right? So that starts positioning learning as a driver of organizational success. When we understand the business and what it's all about, what matters to our business leaders, instead of talking about training language, we're talking business language, we really are able to build I think our reputation with the people that we serve within the organization. So I think here, when we ask the right questions, this capability ensures that the strategy is going to reflect real priorities for the organization. And it helps gain executive sponsorship, because when we go talking to them about how do we help them optimize their results, then we have a different conversation, right? And I think that that's a beautiful experience when you have that. And secondly, organizational development and culture. So a learning strategy really has to align with and ideally shape the culture of the organization. So what is your organization about? So what do we care about? What do we focus on? And what we're proposing actually align with our organizational strategy? We need to be very clear about that, and it's also about where we're going directionally as an organization for not just culture, but also capability of our workforce. It's really important that we are able to connect the dots there and know how to get from point A to point B. And that back to kind of that business, understanding the business, but also understanding our business of learning and development to help get the workforce there. And finally, data analytics, because we can't just plan for analytics and capture them. We have to be able to share those great results. And so this is something that I don't see enough, because learning organizations do so much great work, but the broader organization doesn't get to hear about that, because we're not always really good at promoting our good stuff that we're doing to help advance the organization's workforce, talent, and capability. So those are my top three, if you will, for each of the categories. And I do think it's important to understand, even though it feels like it may take a lot of time, but these are essential for us here. So let's start our learning strategy discussion by first looking at the types of learning strategies that we can create, because I bucket them into three different types. So the first one is learning organizational strategies. And these strategies are really ones that look at an entire learning organization, from the infrastructure to the resources to content strategies and processes, how work is coming in, how it's going out, how we're reporting, everything nuts to bolts and end to end for the learning organization. So these are usually pretty large, because especially if you're a global corporation, there's a lot of considerations there. The second type of strategy would be for critical initiatives. These are things like broad system implementations. If you have call center environments and they have brand new systems for service handling for customer calls, that's a big implementation that requires a lot of thought and strategy about how we roll that out and do it. So that's just one example of that. It could be ERP system implementations, HRIS system implementations, things that people across the organization are having to integrate with and use every day. And it's a big change component in those things. It can be focused also on the best approach to train for a functional area. For example, sales learning strategy or leadership development strategy. So here we're looking at a kind of a segment of the population within the organization, and we need a solid strategy. Most of us understand these things, like a sales learning strategy. How do we get them in the door and get them proficient and then get them functioning well to do their job? And similarly with leadership development, what is our leadership pipeline? What is our strategy when they walk in the door as we develop and grow them and retain them throughout the organization is really critical. And, so the difference in these three types is really the breadth and the scope of the strategy. So it's kind of interesting because sometimes you would think that the broader organizational one for a learning organization would be harder, but actually sometimes ones like leadership development can actually be more challenging to create because of the different approaches, maybe lack of competency models for leadership. We're not quite at a mature enough stage to be able to support that from an end-to-end like pipeline perspective. So there's a lot of different reasons, and sometimes it depends on who's really weighing in on those things. There may be a lot of political nuances as well for them. So it just kind of depends. So I'm curious, what is anybody out there? Is there any kind of focus you're thinking of that resonates with you for your organization right now that you think would be useful of these three, or that you're in the throes of considering creating? Okay. Well, maybe nobody's doing learning strategy. Who knows?
We have one from Casey. He says he's trying to build a strategy and curriculum for new leaders.
For new leaders in his organization. Okay. And that's really like worthy work for sure, because we know leaders have so much impact on things like employee retention and just the employee experience. It's amazing. And not to mention business results. So all right. So thank you for sharing that, Casey. So now that we understand the types of strategies we can create, what I really want you to understand about learning strategies is the role in building relationships across the organization. So a learning strategy is a very powerful tool. And it's a great way to build strategic relationships with your business stakeholders or your clients. And, particularly because you're interacting with them. So one question I might ask just for your own reflection, how many of you here would say that you're truly a strategic partner with your business stakeholders? Those who are running the divisions, like when they plan their budget operations each year, are you sitting at the table with them, talking about it at that time? Or are you working further down in the system? Or maybe even you get handed what their budget is and you have to figure out how you're going to like plug into it retroactively. So the thing is if you feel like you're at the head of the table sitting with your chiefs and executives in the organization, really talking about what's required to support business goals, then, kudos to you and congratulations. But if you said no, you're kind of further down as far as being handed the budget and figuring out how you're going to make it work, you're not alone. There's a lot of people in the learning and development organizations that find themselves in this place. And this is where learning strategy is a great tool to help flip that, because, at the end of the day, the learning and development here, as it says, is an enabler of the organization, and learning strategy is really the pathway for you to be a strategic partner with your business stakeholders. And that's because of the interactions and the communication that you have. And it's the place that you want to be, right? So often learning and development can feel like an order taker, maybe more reactive. But with learning strategy, you can actually position yourself as a strategic partner, more proactive, And, so how do we get there? You can't get there unless you know the business, like we talked about from the competencies before. You can't just know learning and development. And this is where I see some of the challenges with learning organizations sometimes. You really need to understand what defines success for your business stakeholders and the company, because learning and development is an enabler that helps them achieve their business goals, right? So that's your value proposition. And that's when people really begin to listen to you. Um, in my learning and development career, one of my executives taught me early on that, that if not for the business, learning and development in the organization has no role. Our role is to be an enabler to help them reach their business goals through performance development and development. So it's always really stuck with me about that's our purpose, and we need to be able to help them understand that. And when they see we're there to help and not sometimes burden them with too much training, like oftentimes we hear, I think it just changes the conversation. So as we move through this today, you're going to see how to engage your business stakeholders. So I can start with my story, right? So everybody has one, right? So everyone has a story. So for me, when I first discovered the value of learning strategy, I was a new learning manager for an insurance company, call center operations. And I had helped open a new 500-seat call center just 2 months after I started working with the company. That was insane. And as chaotic as it was, our team was able to navigate through that massive undertaking. But what was crazy is that we didn't have any consistency in content. Everybody at every call center was doing things their way. The facilitators kind of had their method and they trained the way they trained. So there was nothing consistent about the way we were training. And that was really a problem, because how could we make that a repeatable process? And, and it showed, after the things settled down and we kind of got through that 500-seat call center stand up, I realized the velocity of change in the call centers, which were now 500-seat call centers, would have us really like chasing ourselves around in circles every single day. I heard a lot of negative feedback from business stakeholders about the quality of training, the need for more efficiency and flexibility, the need to reduce time to proficiency. Like people were coming out of training and then it was taking them forever to really get up to speed with what they were doing. And it was really a result of the way we were doing the training. My facilitators and instructional design team and everything that I had just came into leading called it complaining, but to me it was really manna from heaven, because these were things I knew that we can change, right? Things like quality, efficiency, flexibility, reduce time to proficiency. So these are things that we could actually impact. They're strategic signals. So oftentimes I think in learning and development, we hear these things and think it's complaining, but maybe we need to listen a little bit more to say, what if this could we really change? How much can we possibly affect in the way that we're working together? If we partner with our business partners and stakeholders, we can probably find a solution. So for me, that was our window of opportunity. So we set out to develop a learning strategy and did in fact offer our businesses what we said we would fix. We fixed training quality, efficiency, flexibility, and we reduced the overall time to train by as much as 30 to 50%. And I don't know if you know about call centers, but that's huge. That is absolutely huge for them. But it also decreased the time to proficiency anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. So coming out of training, getting into the work world, we reduced the time to proficiency down by 2 to 4 weeks. So that is an efficiency play. It's a huge productivity play, and it's a financial play for the organization. And built into that strategy was a powerful thing called governance and results reporting. And this ensured that we actually had ownership of the results and worked collaboratively together to figure out what wasn't working. And I have to tell you, for me, it was such a thing of beauty that I wish every learning professional could experience. Our team attended weekly stakeholder staff meetings because training was a standing agenda item now. They wanted us there to kind of talk through how was training going, what's not working. And when we reviewed results, we weren't looking at each other like, who's to blame? Why isn't training fixed that? We all sat there and said, what do you think's not working? We changed the conversation. And so and we created a scorecard to show that the metrics of the training results that we could share with them. And so we had, in fact, become strategic partners, and it all happened because of the learning strategy. So that for me was a powerful motivator, and why I kind of feel like I've become a learning strategy evangelist because of that experience, and what a powerful impact it had on me as a learning executive, to realize how it changed my relationship with my business stakeholders. So now that you see that value of learning strategy, and how it could be used for strategic partnerships, let's take a look at the different elements of a learning strategy. So with learning strategy, of course, it starts with everything, right? We start with the end in mind. What are our business goals and drivers? Because that's where you're trying to go, and how you're going to define success. Did we do a good job? Did we get there? I have one client that we created a learning strategy. We had a lot of barriers that were out of control for us, but it was what the world handed us. And they started out with a 3-year plan, but ultimately, in spite of all of that, they pretty much managed to accomplish everything on that strategy. And as you go back and look at it, how we phased it, it's quite gratifying to see we accomplished that. We did this. We put this into place, and that's a really good feeling. And so I think really understand what are those business goals that we're trying to impact. So it's essential to understand is the first step, because it's the why of why we're doing this. The second part is the current state. So this takes a lot of reading, this stage, that you're working in here for the strategy development. You're doing a lot of talking, a lot of reviewing data, you're analyzing and dissecting information. And this is really the meat of the learning strategy, because most people don't ever do this level of scrutiny on the way things are being done in the organization, especially in a very cross-functional or systems thinking type of way. Many times I've been conducting interviews or surveys at this stage, and the learning and development leader I'm working with kind of will look at me and say, I never knew that. But the thing is because we never asked, right? So here it's where in this stage, it's really important for learning leaders to be vulnerable, right? We can't have thin skins at this stage. It's really a strategic advantage of you, that vulnerability. And it's also hard to humble yourself, right? Because nobody likes to hear what's not working and you're not doing the job for me. But if we just open up our ears, I think we can learn how we can improve or do things differently. But this vulnerability that we have when we're going to our stakeholders and we're just saying, hey, we're here because we think we could do better. Let's talk about that. It's different because it's essential for trust building and relationships with your business partner. And also, you know what? If you know what's wrong, you can fix it. And for me, I'd much rather hear the bad news and know what it is and be able to fix it than to not have that conversation at all. So this has really, for me, always been the most fun part of learning strategy work. And you can really earn your credibility stripes here because you're a listener. You also understand, and you end up so much smarter than you were when you started. But it's also fun because in this stage, you just get to ask a lot of questions, and you don't have to be the person who knows everything. You're really there to seek to understand. The future state is the next part that you're going to do in your learning strategy. And this is where you really lend your learning and business acumen, right? We talked about that earlier. Here you're going to really start thinking about what are the best options given the current state, given the gaps that we have there and the impact that it's having on the organization. What should we be doing to close those gaps? And this is fun. And this is where understanding your technology components is really important. Understanding business goals and outcomes is really important. And also just what you have to work with infrastructure wise as well. So here you got to have a breadth of exposure and experience in best practice, business operations, learning technology tools, research and models. So that may feel overwhelming for some people, but for me, I always say don't despair. That's what ATD, SHRM, industry magazines, conferences, award-winning write-ups, these are all important documents that learning leaders should be always looking at and consuming and reviewing because they help you stay current about what's possible and what other people may be doing to solve problems that are similar to yours. So you really have to be a continuous learner to serve your stakeholders well in the future state stage. And, not because you need to recommend to your clients the latest and greatest like technology. So oftentimes it's the most simplistic approach, that actually yields the best results. So it's not always the most shiny, brightest tool that's out there that people can have. Actually, sometimes we have to temper people's enthusiasm against those things because maybe the organization isn't quite ready for them at the time. So it's really being able to know when to introduce these types of recommendations for best outcomes for the organization. Um, and so I think here, otherwise, they won't be successful. And then you have a strategy that didn't work. So we have to be very mindful there, and thoughtful. And then on roadmap, I love roadmaps, and so do stakeholders and the clients that you serve. If you do curriculum design, like leadership development or things like that, or in call centers, oftentimes there's so much that the customer service agents have to know. And it's really, it's a lot to absorb. So the best way to articulate what it is that you're trying to achieve is creating roadmaps. And we're going to look at a few examples for how you would be able to present that so that someone can digest your thinking, because you're going to have all this detail and you're going to have to be able to kind of bubble it up in a way that executives can understand. Um, so, and then finally, I think implementation and timeline and cost are the final phases. So this is the meat of it. So here's what we learned. Here's how it's impacting us. Here's what we're recommending. Here's what we can gain by doing it. Here's what it's going to take time-wise for us to get there, and how we're going to get there. And then here's the costs that we're going to have. So I think this is super helpful because, especially if you're doing a large organizational learning strategy, it could be a lot to absorb because there's many buckets of information that you're trying to manage through. And so you probably heard of swim lanes, and we'll see some examples of implementation timelines for your look-see. And so I really look at this as this framework that I'm showing you right here is really the playground of your learning strategy. This is where you're operating in. These are the things that you're doing to be able to create that ultimate strategy document that you're going to be sharing. That's also going to be the game plan for the learning organization. One thing that I do think requires a lot of focus here is definitely in that current state. And there's a framework around the worker in the workplace that I think is really important for people to understand. If you're a systems thinker or a performance consultant, by chance, this is no news to you, right? You know this, but everything is a system. And what happens or gets done in one area can have impacts on another. For example, if you happen to miss a target worker population, say back office, and your solution recommendations to train everyone in the new enterprise system left them out, what a huge impact that can have on the success of the rollout of that implementation. There's a lot at stake here. So being more of a systems thinker and really looking through who's going to be impacted by this is just essential. And so one way to do that, as I said, is looking at the worker, and the workplace. So I want to show you what I use for this in essence, and a few of ideas that I have for how you could actually do that. So I'm curious here. You could see, you look at the work because it's like, what are the job descriptions? What are the competencies that they have with the job? What are we doing with retention and performance? Are these things, stable? Or are we losing people? Are they dropping like flies? Is our performance mediocre? The policies, are the policies like lining up, or are they conflicting with the job requirements, right? What job tools do they have to be able to use, or do they have none? Are they having to commit everything to memory when they need a knowledge management system maybe to help for them to be able to access quickly the information that they need to be responsive? Looking at standard operating procedures, incentive structures and plans. The incentive structures oftentimes can have a huge impact on performance, because if the incentive structure is such that it's rewarding maybe not great behaviors or approaches, it could be actually sabotaging your sales results, right? So it's important to look at that as a potential issue. L&D, team structure roles. How are we structured within the organization to support our internal stakeholder? What are industry standards? And then, of course, there's interviews. I tend to use a lot of surveys a lot of times when I'm going out for broader populations, but when I'm usually talking with business stakeholders like divisional or executive level stakeholders, I really prefer to use an interview approach because there's so much data that you get from that conversation. It's just so helpful. So in the worker arena, you have interviews at your disposal, you have surveys, you can do job observations as well. It depends on what you're doing. Call centers are a great place for jobs observations. Manufacturing, if you have field people doing things, you can go out and observe how they're actually doing the work out in the field that could be causing a challenge for them. And then performance results reports, looking at those. You know, some areas are very data driven and now this information is easily accessed. And when it's not, you're going to have to dig deeper through observation and conversation to be able to kind of get what you need to come up with your recommendations. And then finally, in the workplace, you know, like I said, job observations is a great thing to do. Infrastructure review. How is everything set up, especially with a learning organization, to support all the demand that we have coming to us? Again, our job tools that we're looking at, knowledge support systems, just doing a culture scan across the organization to see kind of what is the culture temperature in the organization. Are we aligned? Are we misaligned? Is an important aspect. Again, communications process, rewards and recognition, training content analysis, looking at is the training current? Is it good? Is it outdated? Does it need to be maintained? Do we have a maintenance structure for it? How are we going to keep this so that it's always alive and living? And then looking at operational descriptions and then of course interviews. So these are just some of the ones that I do when I'm doing a learning strategy. And there's many other things that you too could think of, I'm sure, given your own organization that you have. I'm curious if anyone else has anything that they might see that's missing from this list that they would look for because of their organization and its uniqueness. Customer feedback, exactly. Big time. You know, because it's like especially when you're looking at, even when you think about healthcare organizations, call center environment, customer expectations, and yes, depending on the role, what do customers say about performance? Because this is important for sure. You know, sometimes, especially like if you have like utilities or people like that, when we work with a large electrical company out in California doing work with them, you know, sometimes you just actually had to go out into the field in the middle of nowhere and watch how individuals are doing their job, you know? So, all right. So as you can see, I love this work. So I could talk about it forever, but I'm going to move on for now. So what I want to kind of wrap up with here before we look at examples is really looking at, all right, so we have to do this work and it seems like a lot to tackle. So, you know, how are we going to tackle it? And like I like to say, like a good project manager, we put it into phases. And there's four phases that we look at. The first would be analysis and discovery, which we have just spent a lot of time talking about now. And then comes the recommendations that you put together. So probably for analysis and discovery is really going to be about 50% of the time that you spend in the whole learning strategy development. Because this is important. This is foundational. This is the kind of the why we have to change case that you're building. And so it's really important that you get that right. And it's more labor intensive. The recommendations piece would be the next one. This is where you're spending time going, okay, how are we going to solve for these problems? And these could be collaborative. You may be talking with vendors. You may be talking with other content providers. You may be looking at how you're going to optimize your design and development team, or you're going to use third-party support people, or, you know, so there's a lot of more external looking, I think a lot of times too, that happens in the recommendation phase. You know, if we're recommending an LMS that we need now because ours is so old, how much is that going to cost? So, you know, you have a lot of clarification and a lot of running down of numbers and solution sets as it relates to what's viable based on what you learned. And this is really an exciting stage because sometimes it's not a million things you have to do, right? Sometimes it's a few things can solve a lot of problems. And so I think that we want to be thoughtful here, but also remember, as I mentioned before, in your recommendations, make sure that what you're recommending is something that the organization can absorb, right? And if it's a little bold, that's okay. That's okay. But just make sure that you're able to kind of justify how we get there, right? What is the temperament of your leadership team? What is funding sensitivities and things like that? You just really have to make sure that if it's bolder, you better have a compelling case for the why and the how and be able to articulate how you're going to get there. So the validation stage is the third stage, and this is the part we've pretty much drafted out our pieces, our detail about what is this things that we did with our discovery and our analysis and discovery. Here's our recommendations now to solve for these problems. Now what you do is you go back to the business stakeholders and you share with those people that were so kind and gracious to partner with you, and you share with them, here's what I learned, here's what I found out. Do you what is your input? And you get their point of view. And the thing that's really important about this stage is that we're creating alignment. We're creating those champions I talked about earlier. We're creating those people that will be advocates for our strategy, so that when we're actually presenting, they feel like it's their strategy too. It's not you who did it in the learning organization, it's we did this together, right? So I think that that's really important for a learning organization to have that mentality of collaboration and partnership with the business. And this is a co-creation, right? This work is co-created with the business to help achieve these business results through the learning and development team. And this is where you calibrate. So, collectively you work together. What can we stand up for, and what maybe we might want to rethink, right? So that we get that right before we go into what is the final deliverable. So the final deliverable will have certainly the detail orientation, because you have all that great work that you did, but the real challenge of the deliverable is the executive summary, distilling all of that data and information into very digestible, but yet powerful and compelling slides that your chiefs and executives are going to want to say yes to and back you with funding to get the job done. So the timing for each of these things, as I said, is really determined by the scope of the learning strategy and to your internal politics, right? So the validation phase for maybe something very sensitive and critical, like a learning, leadership development strategy, can really have take a long time because of internal politics and just the back and forth and going back and forth and making sure everybody's aligned, or making sure the organization is getting its house in order from a maturity standpoint to be able to effectively support what you're proposing. So it's just going to depend. But I've seen some people do learning strategies from 2 weeks to maybe 6 to 9 months. It just really depends on the strategy and your organizational climate. So I'd like to share with you a couple of things that I've done to help in the visualization of my strategy. I'm going to wrap up with that today, just so that you get a chance to take a look at that. But before I go there, I did want to share with you this resource tool that we'll be making available to you to kind of help you plot out your own learning strategy, right? So I call it just like a jumpstart your learning strategy slide. So here you can use this to really see kind of what type of learning strategy do I want to do? And if the strategy is which type am I doing? And then you have to ask yourself some hard questions, right? Do I have the business knowledge in this area of focus, or do I not, right? And if I don't, how do I get it? Do I partner with somebody? Do I do more research? What are the things I need to do so that you can be realistic with yourself about how you're going to set yourself up for success? And do I have a strategic relationship with the stakeholder, right? And if you do, great. If you don't, you're going to have to start engaging and socializing with them what you're wanting to accomplish, because you need them to be collaborators with you to be successful. And then if you know the business goals, which the stakeholder can help you with, if you don't know, how can you get it? But if you do know, that's your anchor to stand on for the development of your strategy. And I think those goals are so important, and it's really important to get them right from an articulation standpoint. Um, think quantifying, think of quantitative and as well as qualitative data points that you want to be able to achieve. And then going back to the worker in the workplace. This is just such an eloquent framework to really frame up the work that you have to do that current state investigation and discovery. And so start laundry listing the things that were there. Use what I shared with you, or come up with your own based on what your learning organization might have. And then finally, what is your timeline for development? Nobody knows your organization better than you do. So map it out from a timeline perspective so that you can kind of get yourself set up to be effective with this. One thing I will share with you is that when creating learning strategies, depending, like if you're doing an organizational learning strategy for the entire learning organization, it's, and even for leadership development and the systems implementation, all of them require funding, right? They're all going to need budget. So oftentimes, as you start thinking about strategy, don't think about it year end. Start thinking, if you're an annual planner, start thinking whenever your budget cycle start working on that, or know that it's coming and you want to start working on your strategy so that you can make that case with your business stakeholders for the work you think you need to do. So they're advocating for that and their funding, as well as just being in the right place at the right time where money is up for grabs, for lack of a better word. And if you have a solid strategy that your business stakeholders and your executives see as viable, your opportunities for funding are much higher there. So that would be my cliff note for you on that piece. So let's bring it home with a couple of examples. I can't say that these are the only way to do them. I just want to give you some food for thought about how you might present your views to clients, right? So the first one is presenting, like the discovery approach or strategic recommendations. And so if you've ever done a lot of analysis work, which I'm sure you have, then it's hard to, how do I articulate this? And many times, as I've done things with clients in healthcare, whatever, there's so many people that you have to interact with, or for call centers, so how do I share what we did and what we came up with in a way that's not too overwhelming for an executive, right? And so these are just a few simple ways of mixing the visual piece, which is the cliff notes, and then you doing the talking points around them. There's appendix are in your in your presentation for a reason, and that's where you can put your detail. But these are just a couple of examples of how I have articulated these things for clients in the past. You can see the one on the top is more just talking about the discovery only, like who and what we did. Another one would be who and what we did, plus but what's the challenge, right? And this is sort of saying the why are we doing this in that kind of a simplified way. And the one on the right-hand side is more looking at the different recommendations that we're providing for the whole strategy and kind of bucketing them so we can see how we're going to tackle them. The next one is showing current and future state impacts, right? How do you be succinct with what you learned, what you're recommending, and what impact will the executive be able to see? So this is one way that I have done this, really talking about it. What's the problem? What's the remedy? And what can we expect from results? You can put solid metrics around this, but definitely if you're going to do that, make sure you're benchmarking for sure where you're starting. And then here's support model recommendations. So how do we have like governance structure around certain things versus or how are we creating the workflow within our organization so that it's effective? Here's like what I talked about, the onboarding roadmaps, because they're and learning roadmaps. Roadmaps are great visual indicators of what is the learning experience for someone. When you're trying to share like an 8-week training curriculum or something for someone, it's a lot to digest, but someone who leads that function they know the detail and they want to see it in a way that they can trust that what you're saying is there. So you have to kind of strike that balance from your stakeholders who know a lot, to maybe executives who don't know all that detail. So how do you find that happy medium? This one on the right-hand side is one that's worked very well for me for call center environments. This one is for like a healthcare organization that we worked with one time for how they're going to get their team ramped up. And then here's an onboarding roadmap for people in the organization that would be up through 90 days. And then finally, like a learning model, like what is the delivery model for this? How are people going to consume it? Kind of what is the learning path that they go through? Help them understand that if it's a hybrid, it's a VILT, web-based training, live work and experiential type things, and then maybe actually simulations or things like that. So just put it in a way that you can visualize the learner experience for them. So that people could see it, or sometimes it has to do with hierarchical flow of the way they have to consume information and who needs that information. And here's the timelines. I talked to you about the implementation timelines, and here, as you could see, you have like governance, support and sustainability model. You might have job curriculum, specific things, whatever you've called out for the initiatives that you're going to do. How does that flow? And why these are really great is because you can see everything doesn't happen at once. It's phased over time, so you can feel like people feel like it's realistic. You're being thoughtful. You're not trying to push too much through. And you've really thought through how this comes first, then we're able to support this, and then we're able to go on here. And people get a one-page view of like how you're actually going to realize the strategy. This is such an important document. So now that we've talked about learning strategies, I guess we don't have a lot of time left, but there's always so much to cover because there's a lot to share. And I just want to see if there's any maybe question that someone had to put in before we close out for today's session. Thoughts on getting business support for transfer. Getting business support for transfer. Can you say just a little more, Casey, on what you mean by transfer, business support for transfer? Or do you mean for adoption or co-creating? How do they take responsibility for adoption? I usually find that comes with the metrics component. That's where the scorecard, Casey, becomes really important, where you have the metrics that you could show. So it's not that you just did the work, but what kind of an impact are you having? Whether it's survey results, whether it's like, what is the investment that's been made? What might retention look like now that we've started this implementation? Have we seen a decrease for this particular population that we're targeting? So there's different ways to do it, but usually that comes with metrics. So they're hard metrics. And then you go to the business and you have that conversation with them about, oh, how do you think we're doing? Here's what we're seeing. These are the data elements. What do we need to be doing? And I think anytime I'm doing this, it's always how is this impacting them? And maybe the question to ask is, are you finding this valuable? And if not, why? And then having that hard conversation for maybe if they're not engaging, why they're not engaging. I hope that's helpful. But I always find metrics are a great conversation and a collaboration glue, if you will. All right, Dario, thank you so much for allowing me to share my enthusiasm for learning strategy with you today.
All right, well, that wraps up our webinar from Reactive to Transformative, Mastering the Art of Learning Strategy with Susan Minaya. Be on the lookout for the free ebook that will be sent to the email that you registered with. There are some great examples that were here in the webinar that will be included. Thank you all for joining, and we hope you gained some insights. Until next time.